It's the Metro on 1019 WDET Detroit Public Radio. I'm producer Sam Corey, and I'll be here with you throughout the hour, guiding you through some of our best segments that we've had recently. The winter is fading, but it's still often cold outside. Earlier this year, we spoke with Ian Solomon, founder of Amplify Outside, and someone who works at the Detroit Parks Coalition. Robin and Tia spoke with him about what he's doing to remove barriers that prevent people from enjoying the outdoors and from connecting with others.
Ian Solomon is the founder of Amplify Outside and the communications and engagement manager for the Detroit Parks Coalition. His organization tries to remove barriers that prevent people from enjoying the outdoors. Ian is here now to discuss what he does to get groups of people to gather in the winter and how he goes about appreciating the outdoors even during our coldest days. Ian, welcome back to the Metro.
Thank you so much for having me. I love being here.
Don't get us blushing in here. Okay, so before we really get into our winter survival guide and really get into it, Ian, I want to talk a little bit about Amplify Outside. That organization you write works to liberate community through outdoor recreation. Tell me what that means to you.
Oh man, I mean, it means so much to me. I found outdoor recreation really as a personal healing source, and it really grew as time went on. And I'm really interested in politics, to understanding as land as the foundation for like community actualization, for community liberation. It all starts there. And so being able to do something fun, like go on a hike, and knowing that it can lead to something as important as environmental justice conversations, as conversations around land ownership, colonization, it felt like an incredible entry point for me and like the perfect merging, because I love having fun, but I get serious. So
Exactly. I'm the same way. We love to have a good time, but we can also button up if we have to.
Absolutely.
So what are the barriers right now, especially when we talk about being in the city of Detroit and in the population that we have of people of color here? What type of barriers do you see people of color facing within Metro Detroit when it comes to getting outdoors?
Oh man, I mean, transportation is a big one. We are a car-centric city. I actually I'm in between cars right now. So luckily I'm able to get outside, but it's really hard to do that without a car. So something as simple as public transportation. Another thing is narrative, right? Just understanding like, am I someone who's supposed to be outside? Do I look at myself as someone who enjoys outdoor recreation? We are a majority Black city. We know the narrative around Black people and outdoor recreation. So one of the biggest barriers here in the city, because we actually have a vast, amazing park system. I always say people should look at Detroit how they look at Denver. This is a outdoor recreation like central. And so what it really is just the conversation we have. We don't look at Detroit as Denver just because of that narrative. So that's what really Amplify Outside tried to attack, because I realized it was all out there to grab for us in so many ways. Like there are these different economic and access barriers, but a lot of it was just seeing yourself there.
Yeah, and when we think about that, because I was talking to folks here about that as well, trying to figure out how to approach the question of changing the narrative or changing the conversation that we have in the Black community about outdoor activities, what it means, what it looks like, and why in 2025 there's still the conversation of it's quote unquote white people things. So how do we get past that?
We get past it through community, through, each one teach one, through if you start enjoying the outdoors, bring your friend with you that is swearing up and down that they won't enjoy it. I promise you they will. I've brought so many people, so many places where they're like, I'm not sleeping here. I'm not da-da-da. They can't wait to get back out and dig that hole so they can use the bathroom.
Best practice, folks.
It's practice and it's discipline.
Oh, man.
Yes.
That one took me out. But you just basically saying like we have to teach one. We have to take folks with us, grab them up and go. I mean, the first time I went camping about 10 years ago, didn't think I would enjoy it. We actually did real camping with a tent and on the ground, and I did not think I would like it. And I had the best weekend of my life. And I can't wait to do, camp again. And I kept going camping and I continue to go camping. So when we talk about getting out there, spreading this message, bringing folks along, trying to build folks coming outside, what are those barriers specifically? What do they look like in the wintertime? Especially, we talked a little bit about transportation, but what does it truly look like when we're trying to get folks, and not just people of color, but people in general, outside in the winter?
Oh man, again, it goes right back to narrative.
Oh, okay.
It goes right back there. And I think people get annoyed with me because I'm going to turn that mirror right to you. Like, you're going to talk about, I kind of have a gripe with some Detroiters sometimes because it'll be September and you're telling me you're going to be depressed in December. Did you give yourself a chance? You did. We have to be able to.
Stop calling me out.
I'm
Ian.
sorry. I'm going to call everyone out.
you
I
feel
got my
seen,
chance.
Tia?
100%. Oh
Seen
my
and
gosh.
attacked.
Some come October and I'm just like, oh gosh.
Exactly. Of course you're not enjoying it. But I will say it starts with giving yourself grace, right? I've had the blessing to be able to travel all over Michigan during the winter. And, being a city person is a very specific experience. So the land moves with the seasons. The city does not. So you really have to give yourself grace that you are expected to move at a pace that is unnatural. All of us are moving in an unnatural way right now. And we do it every year for 4 months straight. And so we have to first accept and say, I'm not the problem. I am not the problem. And after you get that grace out of the way, you got to get over it. You got to get over it and get with it.
Oh, man. So you work with several organizations to try to get people outdoors. What winter events do you like going on the most?
Ooh, okay. So there's actually some coming up. One of them was mentioned by Alex with Rouge Park, of course. Please go out to that Rouge Park Winterfest. Always fun. But there's one coming up at Rouge Park this weekend as well. Sunday, January 12th. It's a winter wildflower walk. And I think that is a great event because what it really does is highlight that, there's, again, the narrative that everything dies in the winter. Completely untrue. Everything changes and does what it needs to do for itself to be its best self, So it may look like dying to you, but it's actually like kind of self-preservation and you can see the land do that. So I'm excited because I'm really hoping I can make it out to this walk because I want to see some winter wildflowers.
Yes.
But outside of that, there's also the Clark Park Winterfest coming up. That'll be January 18th. And again, just like the Rouge Park Winterfest, there'll be all types of events, games, community. Our parks are active. There are still events happening. So really just staying involved, looking online, trying to find these different events for the Detroit Parks Coalition. If you go to DetroitParksCoalition.com/events, you will see all of the events on a calendar that happen in all of the parks if anyone submits them. So yeah, just tap in. There are so many amazing events going on.
There's a reason to be outdoors if you're like me and you're like, oh, I don't want to be outdoors, but there's reasons. There are things to do. I know they're going to be warming stations so you can, warm up if you have to when you're out there. But you're listening to The Metro on WDET, Detroit Public Radio. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robin Vincent. We're speaking with Ian Solomon, founder of Amplify Outside and communications and engagement manager for the Detroit Parks Coalition. We're talking about how to remove barriers people face to experience the outdoors during the winter and how he helps connect people during all the seasons we have. Ian, as we made reference to earlier, we've stopped investing in public spaces like we used to in, say, the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. And that means that most spaces around us are private. What kinds of things do you think local and state governments should be investing in to help people get outdoors and interact with each other more?
Yeah, I think I mentioned it earlier. Public transportation, huge. Just people being able to get where they need to be that's
vital.
It's vital. You can't do anything if you can't get there. So that's step number one. But also, investing deeper into our public spaces. I'm so grateful to work with parks because especially Detroit's parks, they've had so much growth over the past few years, so much investment, and you really see like it is an immediate payoff. I mean, you invest in a park, say we got Wi-Fi in the parks. And so now that becomes a third space where people can do college applications, people can work from home, and we saw people use it immediately. I mean, people, and we can see the data, we can see that people in the neighborhood are coming repeatedly every week, and it creates a community around that. So definitely just putting money, putting resources, putting things in places to make people comfortable. That's all we need. And we also talked about, parks are outdoors, so that's great. But, we're also in 2025. Health is a concern. So some people don't feel comfortable going in third spaces anymore. And so with that public transportation, it's all about accessibility, and that comes down to disability accessibility as well. If I'm disabled, if I'm immunocompromised, I'm not going to want to come to a third space. How do you make this a space safe for me?
Yeah. It makes me think back to what you were saying about Denver versus Detroit. I was most recently living in Denver before I moved back to Detroit, and I utilized that amazing park system. And as soon as I moved back to Detroit, I had my eyes out for the parks. And I've been so happy to see the way that parks are growing and thriving in the city. But why do you think that like a city like Denver is known for its park systems? How does Detroit become a city known for its parks?
Ooh, so many levels. It starts at home, starts with us pushing that narrative, but also starts with, state, local government agencies. We have Pure Michigan, and Pure Michigan, I'm gonna call you out a little bit. One of the things I want to say is I don't think there's enough focus on Detroit as a city and what this city offers and what extends from it, right? We have the second most visited state park in the country in our city. It's an island park as big as Central Park. So yeah, just really highlighting that opportunity, because as you know, in Denver, you go out to those mountains, you're still driving 2 hours. Yeah, you're going so far.
And lots of people, you're not enjoying the solitude.
Right.
You're sharing those spaces very intimately with others.
Yes. And the road is busy and all of that. And I come to Michigan, I'm like, why would anyone, I drive 2 hours, I can be at sand dunes on Lake Michigan. I drive 2 hours the other way, I can be on cliffs on Lake Huron. There are just so many different environments in Detroit. And I think we should really highlight not just Michigan, but the way that these spaces extend from the city itself.
So there's a lot of work to be done on the PR front for
Absolutely.
Michigan. Let's go to the phones and talk to Aisha. Thanks for calling the Metro. You're the owner of Opal Grove. Tell us about that.
Hi. So Opal Grove Games is an inclusive tabletop game store here in Detroit. And we have kind of some of the same barriers in that I get a lot of Black people telling me, I don't know about all that. And so I just think that tabletop games, board games are a really incredible way for people to connect genuinely. And bonus for the folks like me who have maybe not jumped into the world of outdoor exploration, you can stay inside and be warm and play those games, or you can take a lot of them with you wherever you go.
That's one of the power of parks, is that you can do literally anything there.
Anything that you might do inside, you can do in a park. Well, almost. So in the last minute that we have, Ian, I know you really appreciate the federal dollars that have been invested in Detroit parks and how that has been truly transformative, particularly during the Duggan administration, and Mayor Duggan is on his way out. What do you want to see from the next mayor of Detroit when it comes to how they view and prioritize parks?
Well, I will say there are some amazing people working in the parks in the city right now. So I would want a continuation of those people, a continuation of their passion. But also I'd like to see just more amplification, right? We're doing the Detroit Parks Coalition, the Detroit Parks and Rec. We're doing all we can to show people that these parks are on and they're full. But yeah, just show more people.
That was Ian Solomon of the Detroit Parks Coalition and of Amplify Outside, speaking about what he does to get people outside and connecting with each other, even during cold winter months. Up next, we'll hear about a church in Ferndale that also hosts comedy events. Churches are known for a few things: steeples, beautiful songs, maybe invoking reflection on how to live a better life. But one Ferndale church is doing things a little different. Drew Freilich is the co-lead pastor of the Renaissance Vineyard Church, and he joined us earlier this year to discuss what inspired him and his wife to start a comedy club in their church's basement.
Okay, so where did the idea of doing comedy in the basement of your church come from?
So I started doing comedy in Shanghai, China at the Kung Fu Comedy Club. I was there for 11 years, and then we moved back to the U.S. in 2018, and we had just adopted our son, who's from China, and we were young parents. I still wanted to keep doing comedy. My wife and I both do comedy, and but we couldn't go out. We're like young parents stuck at home, and so we built a small comedy club in the basement of our house in Farmington Hills. It was a rental. The landlord was thrilled, obviously, with what we had done. But then, later we moved out. We moved to Detroit. We were planning to do the same thing in Detroit, and then the pandemic hit, and people didn't exactly want to be in tight spaces listening to people breathe all over them, so there was a hiatus there. We became the pastors of the church in 2021, and it was actually my wife's idea. She said, look, why don't, you love doing this. It's a great thing. Why don't you put a space down in the basement of the church? There was a space down there where they used to do like kids plays, Noah's Ark, David and Goliath back in like the 60s and 70s. It's like an old building. And so we put the space down there, and it's just been this wild experiment for the last 2 years.
So the Basement Comedy Club in your house set the foundation for the Basement Comedy Club in the church. Could you first just describe to us what the club was like in your house?
Yeah, so it was a bungalow house, very small house in Farmington Hills. We would put my son up in the attic during the shows. Like, we'd put him to bed, and he'd fall asleep. So he had no idea that these amazing shows were going on down in the basement. He was 3 years old. And the club was just this small black box theater, kind of inspired by Edinburgh Fringe. Just a perfect little space, 25 people. We would do $10, all you can drink boxed wine from Costco. And it was a blast. It was like the coolest thing ever,
Francia?
A little higher class.
It was Boda Box.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah, we're fancy. Yeah.
When in doubt, pinky out.
Yeah, exactly.
So the comedy session that you hold at the church in the basement, that comes after an AA meeting, an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. Talk about the connection between comedy and healing. What kinds of things can comedy offer someone who's trying to manage an addiction, who's in recovery?
Yeah. So just to clarify, so the meeting that happens before that is Celebrate Recovery. So we do have Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous at our church. Our church it's got like almost 10 meetings a week there. It's kind of the hub of recovery in Ferndale. And Celebrate Recovery is this 12-step program, Christian 12-step program. And we do that at 6:30. We have like a dry bar in the basement at 8 p.m. And then we have the shows at 9 p.m. Basically, if you've been to a meeting or if you're kind of going through recovery, a lot of hard stuff will come up. Trauma, hurts from the past, things like that. A lot of stuff comes up. And so we find it's very helpful for people to, after you've just been doing the hard work of being in a group and being really vulnerable and authentic, to just go down and have a good laugh and just kind of laugh it out. It's very helpful for everybody, I think.
Yeah, I imagine that would offer some really important release. I wonder if you think that comedy helps people open up then in ways that maybe they're not accustomed to doing if they're taking advantage of both on a regular basis.
Yeah, I think it opens people up. And comedy can kind of talk about difficult topics in a way that we normally... It's difficult. It's difficult to talk about depression, suicide, substance abuse, stuff like that. And so humor can kind of grease the wheels a little bit on some of those conversations and interactions. And so it's kind of a great little combination. It's an odd combination. You wouldn't think, okay, 12-step and comedy, those don't go together, but they really do in ways that surprise me constantly. And it's been fun to watch it kind of develop.
It's bridging the human experience with both, I think, that you're talking about, with meetings that are focused on recovery, but then also comedy. Why do you think that the shows that you've held on Friday nights have become so successful? They often sell out. Is that right?
Yeah. So we moved it to Friday nights last year. And since then, basically since we combined it with recovery, it's just been popping off ever since we did that. And It's kind of a magic combination. It's a little bit of a mystery to me, but I'm figuring it out, but I'm not exactly sure what the magic ingredient is, but it seems amazing to watch.
You're listening to The Metro on WDET, Detroit Public Radio. I'm Robin Vincent.
And I'm Tia Graham. We're speaking with Drew Freilich, the co-lead pastor of the Renaissance Vineyard Church in Ferndale. So you and your wife both are comedians. You both are working in the church. You're both leading the church. Can you talk a little bit about, because you were just talking about it with Robin, this magic that you all have been able to create together, and this blend of relationships that you've been able to meld, especially in Ferndale. Can you talk about the importance of having this community space for these type of conversations?
Yeah, I think for a church, especially, it's important to have these kind of in-between spaces. It helps people know that, the church, there's things we take very seriously. The way of Jesus, generosity, justice and mercy for the marginalized, having an open mind, showing love to enemies, forgiveness, peacemaking. These are things we all take very seriously. But we're not taking ourselves too seriously. So the comedy club kind of helps to show that. And it's good for people to come in. And because a lot of churches, from my own experience, are not particularly welcoming environments. They may be toxic environments. It's good for us, too, to have this space where we can have this touch point with the community. People can come in and be like, okay, these people aren't completely crazy. They're only a little bit crazy. You know what I mean? And so it's really helpful for us too to just have something where, you can come out, just have a good time. There's no pressure. We're just having a good time, and we're kind of normal, just like everybody else.
Exactly.
And that's important for a church, especially nowadays. So. And
that's like the perfect segue, because it's one of our next questions. There is a lot of people are leaving the church. We see, especially young people, it's harder to get younger people in to the church. So why do you think the churches need, what do churches need to do in order to bring more folks in, of course, but in what way have you all found a way to bring in people?
Yeah, I mean, the church in America is, especially since the pandemic, it was already, I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but I use the comparison of Blockbuster Video. We're kind of running Blockbuster Video. It's in decline. That's not like my opinion. That's facts and data. So since the mid-2010s, the church in America is in decline. Since the pandemic, it's like it fell off a cliff. And so it's just kind of, a lot of churches have lost their way. They're getting away from what it's about, which are the things, I just listed. It's about loving other people. It's about making the world a better place. And we've gotten away from that.
And why do you think that happened? Like, why do you think there's a separation now with what church was or it should be or is actually versus what we're seeing today?
Truthfully, I think it's about power. Mm-hmm. I think people want power. And church is used to have power over other people. And it's been used like that for a long time. If you go through 2,000 years of church history, it's this constant cycle of the church abuses its power, it holds power over people, and then there's some sort of reformation, some sort of rebuild, as it were, and they go back to their roots and remember, we need to remember the poor, we need to remember to be peacemakers in the world, to be all about loving our enemies, to be bringing peace to our families, to our communities, and then it kind of grows again, and then it eventually loses its way again, and it's this endless cycle. So that's kind of where we're at, and I think that the church in America is it's in the middle of a really big renovation, as it were. A lot of things are going to have to be torn down, and that's a good thing, and there's going to be new expressions and new things that'll pop up that'll look new for a new generation, but it's exciting.
Yeah. And Drew, you've spoken about the importance of church as a space of community that we're talking about now, and that it can be more effective than one-on-one therapy, having that community. Talk about why you think that is. You talked about it a little bit earlier with Robin, but expand on that a little bit. Just being in community and having these conversations that seem therapeutic, it could be possibly clinical, but you have that communal space that eases it up a little bit.
Yeah, so I was a therapist for almost 10 years, and I was actually during the pandemic, I was working at a therapy clinic, as you know. So the job that I just left was mental health counseling, and one of my frustrations with counseling, I mean, counseling is great, but it has its limitations as well. One of the difficulties with it is, you know, I'd be having these conversations with clients. We're doing good work, but at the end of the session, there's no one else in the conversation. There's no larger group. And you can't just rely on one therapist, one person, 1 hour a week. You know, any healing that happens in the community, it has to be a communal thing. It can't be an individual thing. And then I think the church also, if done well, can give people the opportunity to also look outside of themselves, to say, look, it's not just about my own self-care, my own self-actualization. There is like a missional element to life where we are meant to serve others and to make this world a better place. And so if church is done well, it can fulfill that role as well. And so that's one of the reasons I became a pastor from being a therapist, is I thought, okay, maybe this will work a little better for me. So
I could literally talk to you so much more about the science of all that. But before we do let you go, you're getting a doctorate that's very much related to this discussion. It's in neuroscience of comedy and a theology of comedy. Are your studies changing the way you lead the church or the way you do comedy?
Wow, that is a great question. Yeah, so the doctorate that I'm doing is in relational neuroscience and theology. And so I thought, is there any way that they're going to allow me to pick a dissertation topic where I can talk about comedy? There is actually quite a bit of neuroscience research published on comedy. It's kind of a new area. And so, so they said, yeah, we'll allow it. Like, you could take a crack at it, you know, and I've just started on that project. But I think that, there's areas that if you can get people to laugh, they can open up a bit more. You can talk about a little bit more difficult topics. You can get a little bit deeper. There is an element of building trust when you're doing comedy with a group of people. They need to trust you before they're going to laugh. I've done shows where I totally bombed, and it's because I just went straight into my jokes, didn't build any trust with the audience. They were like, we don't know you. We don't really like you. We're going to sit here in silence while you just die 1,000 deaths, you know?
I always feel so bad when I see that happening to a comic.
Was that in Detroit? It wasn't in Detroit.
Oh, I've done it all over.
Many places.
I've bombed worldwide, yeah.
That was Tian Robin speaking with Drew Freilich about his church, Renaissance Vineyard in Ferndale. You can find out about their comedy events by going to renvc.com. Up next, we'll learn about the life of Detroit author Donald Goines as a new documentary is being made about him. Detroiter Donald Goines was a military vet who later became addicted to heroin. But Goines turned his life around, and between 1970 and 1974, he became a prolific author. Sadly, he was killed in a murder that still hasn't been resolved. But now, Craig Gore and Robert Bailey, two film creators, are making a documentary on Donald's life. Recently, Robin and Tia sat down with the makers of the film to understand who Donald was and how he influenced many people who were born years after him.
Donald Goines is considered the godfather of ghetto realism. He wrote fantastical stories based on the realities and struggles of living in urban spaces and among vulnerable Black communities. Goins, born in Detroit in 1936, grew up during a time when the world was heading into another world war, World War II. He joined the military at just 16 years old and fell into the world of heroin. He ended up in prison for drugs after returning from the war, and once released, he turned things around and wrote 16 books in 4.5 years before he was murdered alongside his wife Shirley in Highland Park.
Tia, almost 50 years later, the murders remain a mystery, but Goins' story is being revisited with the help of the film company Detroit Sun. Craig Gore is the executive producer of the documentary, which explores the life and death of Donald Goins. The film also highlights his contributions to hip-hop culture after his death. Robert Tate Bailey is the founder of King Tape Productions. He's also the author of The Hustle Code, a guide on how to change perspectives and circumstances with empowering messages. Robert has been documenting the story of Goins. Robert and Craig, welcome to the Metro.
Thanks for having us, Tia and Robin.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Craig, I want to start with you. Who was Donald Goins? Talk about his life a little bit. We know he was in the military, that he had problems with drugs, but he was so much more than those things.
Yeah, of course he was. His story is really fascinating because he came from a middle-class Black family who owned dry cleaners in Detroit. And, and he kind of could have, lived a maybe an easier life. But we were talking about this last night with Tape, is he was really looking for adventure, and he joined he was curious about the world and just wasn't going to settle for that. So he joined the military when he was 15 and a half with a fake birth certificate. And by the time he was 16, he's on the front lines in Korea. He was an ambulance driver picking up dead bodies, saw the carnage, got hooked on heroin in the war, and came back, and then and then he got into a life of crime, did pimping for a while, drug dealing, went to jail for a robbery to buy heroin. And while he was in prison in 1970, he read the book Pimp by Iceberg Slim, which had just come out. And that inspired, he was like, wow, it was really raw and real. And I think it was the first best-selling book that outside of the Black community, you got to see this kind of street culture. Housewives read it, and it was like, wow. So it was a big thing. And Donald was inspired by that and started writing down his own experiences. And while he was still in prison in 1970, he sent some sample chapters to Holloway House, who was the publisher of Iceberg Slim, and they accepted his novel. And when he got out, he changed his life. And as you guys said, from 1970 to 1974. He wrote 16 books. It is amazing, his productivity and his imagination.
And Robert, bringing you into the conversation, can we talk a little bit about author Donald Goins and the kind of topics that he covered, and if it inspired you at all as an author?
Yes. Thanks for having me again. Yes. He inspired me as an author, especially from being from Detroit, because I'm from Detroit, from the east side. Grew up over there and ran the streets, did prison time. That's where I first got introduced to Donald Goins. And that's kind of like a tradition, like for youngsters that go into prison, you're first handed a Donald Goins book. So these are the first books that we're even reading, some people even in life. And so that's what inspired me to be an author. But his works, how he was so he was so detailed, graphic and detailed. And so that inspired me to go on in music to project, my lifestyle, to be graphic and music and with my novel. Yeah, authentic with my novel as well that I just published myself. And I think with his story, he deserved to be recognized, you know what I'm saying? And have his place in American history solidified.
That was actually going to be one of my follow-ups, Robert. I was going to talk about his legacy there and the importance of his legacy, especially as you said, that's the first time that some folks are even opening a book and reading a actual novel book, a book with chapters. That's right. Can you both go into that? We're going to start with you, Robert, of course, being a man who was handed that Goins book as you walked through those doors and how it changed you as you walked out. And then, Craig, we're going to bring you in as well.
Sure.
So, Robert, you first.
So what's so interesting about this, and that's why I'm so excited to be able to do this project, because I'm also an executive producer on this project along with Craig Gore. And it's like I've watched documentaries on him before, or, people have tried to do things before, and they still haven't, shed the correct light on his life. From talking to his daughter, we are close friends with his daughter, whom was in the house when the murders actually occurred. And just talking to her and learning different things amongst the family, and with Eddie Jackson Jr., he studied and published the book, The Low Road. Like, just learning so much about him and how inspiring he was to everybody, and how he could just get into these creative spaces and write so detailed that his legacy, his story has to be told. So it's like a goal for me now to make sure that his story gets the true light that it needs to have, because this is a true icon of Detroit history.
Yeah.
Craig?
Well, yes. Yeah. I'll just like Tape, I went to prison when I was 18. I was a car thief. And there was like there's old Westerns from Louis L'Amour and Stephen King, and there was Donald Goins. And then when I was, in jail, I read all his stuff. And then when I was shipped to prison, I became a librarian. Oh, wow. So when I got out, I just did, 2 years. I got out, and it inspired me. I was on parole, and I was in North Carolina, and I said, I got to get out of here. I'm going to go down the tubes, and all my friends are doing bad things. So I ended up moving to Chicago and going to Columbia College Chicago, and I got a degree in fiction writing and a minor in poetry. And then I moved to LA and became successful as a screenwriter. But Donald Goins was always on my shelf. All his books, I would reread them every few years. And then Eddie Allen's book, the biography, came out in 2005, and I read that. So those books were on my shelf. So during the writer's strike 2 years ago, I couldn't write any scripts, and me and Tape looked it up, and there was no proper full-length documentary about Donald Goins. And so we were like, wow, let's go back to Detroit and start this thing. And we met the biographer, we met Donna. We hired a private investigator, Bill Proctor, who's great, to start looking into the unsolved murder. Because, 50 years later, the gangsters and the people who did it are probably dead, but maybe someone will talk. Yeah. So that's what got us back interested in it. We just couldn't believe there was not a doc about him. And as you know, Nas, 50 Cent, Snoop, all kinds of big rappers, Tupac, they mentioning Goins in their lyrics, and also big writers, James Elroy, Walter Mosley, novelists, people look up to Goins too, his whole legacy. And he sold 20 million copies of his books, and most of them are in jails and prisons. So that his legacy as far as like teaching literacy is really large, but it's unknown to most of the public.
That was T and Robin speaking with Craig Gore and Robert Bailey about a documentary they're creating on the life of Detroiter Donald Goins. A domestic cookbook for the kitchen. That book was published by Melinda Russell in 1866 in Michigan. It's the oldest known published cookbook. Julie McLoone is a curator in the Special Collections Research Center at the University of Michigan. She recently preserved a domestic cookbook. Here was that conversation.
Welcome back to the Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent.
And I'm Tia Graham. And when you're cooking, do you dust off that old recipe book with grandma's handwriting?
Mine has smudges. It's dirty from
fingerprints,
me.
Exactly. Maybe it gives you step-by-step directions and tips from generations of family cooks, or it may just give you enough info, just enough that you can learn and explore the kitchen and find new skills. But let's jump into a time machine and take a little ride back to 1866, and we're going to set course for Paw Paw, Michigan. The small town located just west of Kalamazoo was the home of Mrs. Melinda Russell. Mrs. Russell was a self-published author of a cookbook. Now, at that time, Michigan, like other parts of this country, was grappling with the impacts of the American Civil War.
And that cookbook is called A Domestic Cookbook for the kitchen. It's the only known copy of the earliest cookbook by a Black woman. Julie McClune is a curator in the Special Collections Research Center at the University of Michigan. One of her focus areas is the evolution of cuisine in various regions and cultures. McClune helped preserve a domestic cookbook for the kitchen by Mrs. Melinda Russell. Welcome to the Metro, Julie.
Thank you. I'm really glad to be with you this morning.
So first, could you tell us how this historic book came into your possession?
Absolutely. So it actually came before I arrived at the university. I came here in 2015, but many years ago, back in the early 2000s, is actually when Jan Longoni, who's our primary donor of the Janice Bluestein Longoni Culinary Archive, received a phone call from a dealer out in California who said that he had found a cookbook by an African-American woman in the Civil War. And Jan said, well, that doesn't exist. And he said, well, I'm holding it. And she said, well, then I want it. And so she purchased that book. It was found in the estate of Helen Owens Brown, who was a California collector. And so Jan obtained this cookbook, and then she donated it to the University of Michigan. So it became part of the Janice Bluestein Longoni Culinary Archive. And that's how I've been very fortunate to get to become part of its story as I curate that collection.
What did it mean for you as a curator to get your hands on, I should say, something as special as Mrs. Melinda Russell's cookbook?
Yeah, it really is an amazing piece of American history, African-American history, Michigan history. Usually I don't like to use the word treasure because I feel like one of the most important things about archives and libraries and special collections is that materials gain really their interest and value through their relationship to each other, which is why we have collections, right? But even within that context, I'm going to say that Melinda Russell's cookbook really is one of the treasures of the Janice Bluestein Longoni Culinary Archive. And it is such a slim little pamphlet with brittle paper. The pages are cut to slightly different sizes. You can really tell that this came out of a regional printing office in the 19th century. It's really amazing to see and touch it.
And Julie, I love that this cookbook is an important launching point to help us to understand that moment during the Civil War in her life. And before we get into Melinda Russell's life, though, I do want to take a moment to talk about the recipes. One that certainly made me hungry, a ginger pound cake, 1 pint molasses, half a pound sugar, half a pint sour milk, 1 teaspoon cream of tartar, to do soda, lard, butter. I'm seeing, yes, this very rich, delicious sounding ginger pound cake, but it's missing some directions, no?
Yes, it is. A lot of older cookbooks assume a high degree of culinary knowledge. And there are also cookbooks from, older time periods that are written for beginners. Lydia Maria Child published a book called The American Frugal Housewife. But in general, older cookbooks assume a lot of culinary knowledge. They're also working with very different technology than we have today. So Melinda Russell and her compatriots did not have an electric oven or a gas oven they could turn to 375 degrees. So it was really up to the individual to know their cooking apparatus, to know a slow fire from a hot fire, to know how to tell when a cake or a bread loaf was done.
I would have been in trouble. What do these recipes tell us about the food that was available in Michigan at the time?
Yeah, so an important part of Melinda Russell's history is that she was herself a professional cook. And before she came to Michigan, at one point she ran a boarding house, and at another point she had a pastry shop. So she was a professional cook that was publishing this. And so it's understandable from that perspective that a lot of the content of this cookbook is for pastries and for baked goods. So it's sort of special occasion things or things for middle class and upper class households. And so it's not necessarily reflective of what everyone was eating, but it definitely still reflects, what was available. And you'll find things that are not common to us today, like there's a rosewater cake, or I'm actually looking at a page of the new edition right now for Elizabeth lemon cake. And today, for example, when we say something's very basic, we say it's vanilla. But in the 19th century, lemon would have actually been sort of the basic cake flavor.
Wow.
I've got issues with that. You're listening to the Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent.
And I'm Tia Graham. We're speaking with Julie McFloon, a curator in the Special Collections Research Center at the University of Michigan. We're talking about a cookbook self-published by Mrs. Melinda Russell, a Black woman in Paw Paw, Michigan in 1866. Now, Julie, we want to jump into who Melinda actually was. Just talk a little bit about her nomadic roots. We're talking about a time, especially before 1866. This is a country embroiled in battle due to the Civil War. So can you talk just a little bit about the world in which Melinda is a cook and she's writing cookbooks?
Absolutely. So one of the really special things about this cookbook is that Melinda Russell actually includes a short autobiography of her life at the beginning of it, which is our primary source for what we know about her. So she was born and raised as a free Black woman in eastern Tennessee, and her mother belonged to a family that had been set free during Melinda's grandmother's time period. So she had already been living in a family of free Blacks for some time before the Civil War. But when she was 19, she set out with a group heading for Liberia, but her money was stolen, and she ended up getting stranded in Lynchburg, Virginia, where she worked as a cook and a nurse and kept a wash house. And she also trained as a cook. She got married to Anderson Vaughn, although she was widowed just a few years later, and she also had a young son who was disabled. So part of her story is also that she's supporting herself and her son with her industry and her entrepreneurship. So she later returned to Tennessee and held a pastry shop for 6 years. But then again, during the Civil War, time of great unrest, especially for a free Black woman in Tennessee, her money again was stolen, and she was obliged to leave home. So she traveled to Michigan. And part of her goal in selling this and printing and selling this cookbook is that she's hoping to earn money to return to Tennessee after the war, hoping to try to recover some of her property.
And Julie, could you just talk about that a little bit there? Talk about the hope in that. She had this idea that there was a home for her to return to. And now that you give us a little bit more of a background on Melinda and who she was, she comes from a few generations, actually, of free Black Americans. And that's a very rare thing to hear about in the 1800s or 1860s, around that time. So could you talk about how her being generations of free Black woman, as well as her having this knowledge and understanding, can you talk about that hope there that she was able to have to return back to Tennessee?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, that's a really wonderful part of her story as well. I wish that we knew that she had been able to return to Tennessee and that she was successful, but we don't know what happened after her cookbook was published. So there's a local researcher, Mary Rones Parsons, who's done quite a bit of work with census records and other documents, and she's found materials showing a Melinda Russell of about the right age at the right sort of places and times in certain parts of her earlier life. But we don't know what happened to her after she published her cookbook. Yeah. So we have this hope that she's expressed, and I hope that she got what she was looking for. But sadly, we don't really have documentation after 1866 of her life.
Well, which is so sad. I hope that one day it does come to light that we know what happened to Melinda there. But what does this tell us, especially the preservation of this very rare cookbook about the history of Black Americans here in Michigan, but in Paw Paw, Michigan?
Yes, I mean, that's actually, I'll share something that I just learned myself last week, because apparently in Southwest Michigan, there actually was already at this point in time an established Black community, including Black middle-class families who, along with white middle-class families, could have been the audience for this cookbook, who would have been able to afford potential help in the kitchen, making serving cakes and things like that. And I actually just learned that from a great conversation we had last week at the Ann Arbor District Library with Dr. Shereen Shara Johnson and Dr. Jessica Kenyatta Walker. I'm not from Michigan, so my knowledge of Michigan history is a little bit sketchy still. I'm still learning my way. But I thought that was a really important part of the story as well, that Melinda Russell was not, say, an isolated Black person coming to Michigan at that point in time, that there was a Black community in Michigan already at that time.
Which is a question as well. We know about the Great Migration and when that all began, but clearly there were things happening and movement and folks moving around in this country all the time, especially during the Civil War 1860s era. So if we could just expand on that just a little bit, and the importance of these moving populations and groups of people, especially here in the state of Michigan. There's one thing that I know, we have about a minute left though. So can you just talk about those pockets of people of color that we saw popping up throughout Michigan, especially after the Civil War?
Sure, absolutely. And of course, Michigan is on the way to Canada, right? So it also has an important history as part of the Underground Railroad as well, which definitely plays a part into African Americans coming to Michigan and settling here.
Thank you so much. My last thing before I let you go, truly 30 seconds or so, just talk about where folks can find that book. I know it's a PDF version now. I've been online looking at it. I'm going to try some of these recipes. So let us know.
Yes. So come to the Michigan Publishing website and you will see the ebook version is open access. You can read it online. It's a beautiful edition, lots of rekeyed with lots of white space. Or you can purchase a paperback for about $25. And it's beautifully designed. The editors and designers did such a wonderful job with it.
That was T.N. Robbins speaking with curator Julie McClune about preserving the oldest cookbook ever published, a domestic cookbook, which was written by a Michigander. In the next hour, we'll explore whether the actions of our current president and his administration are bleeding into authoritarianism or if they're just good old-fashioned conservative politics. This is WDT Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation.
The WDET mobile app is the easiest way to bring Detroit's stories and sounds with you wherever you go. Listen to us live or dive into our shows on demand and catch up on the ones you missed. If you have something to say, use WDET's open mic to send us a voice message. And if you believe in what we do, you can even make a gift and support. It's everything you love about WDET made easy. Download the free WDET mobile app from your app store today.
Welcome back to the Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent.
And I'm Tia Graham. There are some things that we know about the Trump administration. One of them is that they want to make government cuts, a lot of them. Trump has put Elon Musk in charge of getting government workers to leave their posts. And already, the Office of Personnel Management has said that 75,000 federal employees accepted a deferred resignation proposal. And then there have been thousands of layoffs. 2,300 at the Department of Interior, 1,000 people at the Veteran Affairs Department, 1,000 National Park Service employees, and another 1,300 at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and likely 5,400 at the Department of Defense.
Yeah, Tia, there are also pending freezes for funding to government agencies, including money that funds critical research and money that would otherwise fund programs and services related to food, housing, healthcare, and infrastructure. All of this funding could be halted. Trump's critics say that this is all very bad. They say we're watching the unraveling of government and democracy. Here's Congresswoman Debbie Dingell on our show yesterday.
What you're seeing with DOGE is just a meat cleaver across the board. We could be looking at Medicaid cuts that will deny seniors long-term care, children will be denied health care. We may not have SNAP, which helps keep our kids from being hungry. I'm worried about a lot. Not a little, a lot. All these programs impact our communities and our neighbors.
His supporters, however, tell people they're excited about government cuts that conservatives and libertarians have long wanted.
It's been exactly as advertised. He was going to hit the ground running. He had 4 years of thinking about the possibility of getting back into this position. He made promises along the way. He was much more ready. He came roaring in. Sure, some of it is going to be off-putting because he is reactionary. He is explosive. He is unpredictable. Those were many of the reasons that people aligned with this president.
Trump supporters often say to watch what Trump does, not what he says. So how should we interpret Trump's actions 1 month in? Is this good old-fashioned conservative values in action, or is there something fundamentally different, fundamentally dangerous about this administration, as Democrats like Debbie Dingell are warning? Joining us now to discuss how the Michigan GOP views President Trump's first month is Denise Elias. She's the executive director at Oakland County Republican Party. Denise, thank you for joining us on the Metro.
And thank you for having me.
So the first month of Trump's second presidency has been busy, to say the least. What stands out to you as the most successful part of his term so far?
Well, there are many things to point to that would spell success. But for me, the most important thing is the fact that he said what he was going to do. He got into office and he began executing against that immediately. He was well prepared. He came in with his choice of cabinet members. He got those pushed through immediately, and they have executed on their plans immediately as well. So what I think we're seeing is high productivity and efficiency in action. And Republicans here in Michigan, in Oakland County, and across the country are thrilled to see him do what he said he was going to do.
Denise, let's stay in Michigan, though, if we could for a moment. How would you say his work is affecting Michiganders? Can you zoom in a little bit?
So in terms of Michiganders, we have Republicans stopping in our office constantly, calling us on the telephone. People are thrilled, again, like I said, to see that he's doing what he said he was going to do. The size of government has grown exponentially, both at the federal, state, and local levels. And it was time for somebody to take a close look at it and take some action. So people are responding by coming in and volunteering, asking how we keep the momentum going, wanting to be more involved. Seeing progress in government has inspired people.
Okay, so you're seeing Trump's actions as a mobilizing force. Now, we've been focused a lot on this show lately about President Trump and Elon Musk's actions to significantly downsize the federal government. We've spoken with researchers, educators, Trump voters, and a Democratic lawmaker. But we want to hear about this from the Michigan GOP, too. What do you make of the downsizing of the federal workforce? Is this the kind of small government that conservatives elected Donald Trump on?
Absolutely. And I think when you take a look at some of the things that they've uncovered in just a short period of time, it speaks volumes. So the number of people over the age of 100 collecting Social Security benefits, our tax dollars going outside of the country to support DEI and other programs around the world, money coming from our government into NGOs, $85 million to the Clinton Foundation. That is all unnecessary spending and waste from the federal government. And when people look at that and they look at their cost of living today, and they look at how their families have to live, they're very happy that they're taking those positions.
Right. I mean, federal orders have local consequences. I would like to point to one recent example, though, of the recent layoffs at the Department of Veterans Affairs. Those job cuts resulted in 1,000 people losing their jobs, one of whom we spoke to last hour. His name is Andrew Lennox, a former Marine. And he said that this firing was done chaotically and it put the VA in a really poor position to assist the public. What's your message to former federal workers like Andrew or the people who rely on the services that the VA provides?
Well, first of all, I would tell you that my father is a veteran and he relies on VA services So I am very much in tune with what happens at the VA because I take him to all of his VA appointments. What I would say is, an analogy is if you have mold in your house, you are going to have to tear down some drywall in order to make sure you eliminate or eradicate the mold. And in the process, you might cut a wire or maybe even burst open plumbing, and you may not do it exactly correctly. But when you are done, you will have fixed all of those issues and you would have eradicated the bad thing in your home. So I think of it like that. I think that because things are moving quickly, there's a possibility that some mistakes will be made. I also feel very confident that they will be fixed and that the pendulum will swing to where it needs to be in terms of providing services to veterans and everyone else around the country.
Denise, you just mentioned that your father is a veteran, that you're familiar with the crucial services that the VA provides. It has me wondering if Trump takes actions that you might find questionable, and perhaps, let's say, it is making cuts to the VA. Are you willing to come out and say that, this is a president that you voted for, that you supported, but you don't support, let's say, action A, B, or C?
Well, first of all, what I would say is I think that President Trump brought back respect and honor to the military in this country. The military in this country for a very long period of time really did not feel proud of themselves anymore. We have 22 veterans who take their own lives every year. We have people on the streets who are homeless while our government is spending money on illegal immigrants, housing and feeding them. I think that President Trump is loved by the military, and I think he loves them. And in the long run, I believe he will do what is right by them.
From your perspective, what is the bad thing going on at the VA that needed to be cut? Or do you see anything thus far?
I would not have an opinion on that.
Reducing costs, limiting spending, increasing efficiency. These are phrases that we have been hearing a lot, and they remind me of the way corporations often operate to generate profits. So I wonder, do you think that the government should be run like a business?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think the government has to be managed somewhat like a business because like a business, you have revenues and you have expenses. The government is managing our money. So to the extent that they manage our money as Americans, we should expect them to do all of those things, be efficient, be productive, and use the money where it is needed on the essential services that the American people either need or want. And so I guess my final answer for you would be, yes, I believe that the federal government and all government agencies should be much more corporate-like in their how they go about managing the business of the United States.
You're listening to The Metro. I'm Robin Vincent.
And I'm Tia Graham. We're talking about President Trump's first month back in office and asking, are these good old-fashioned conservative values in action, or is there something fundamentally different about this administration? Our guest is Denise Elias, and she is the executive director at Oakland County Republican Party. So, Denise, recently, over 20 civil service employees resigned from DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, writing in a resignation letter that they swore to serve the American people and uphold the Constitution, but they cannot honor those commitments working for DOGE. What was your reaction to their resignation?
Well, I wasn't aware that there were 20 Doge employees that resigned. Just like any other place that you work, there are people who are going to be a fit for your organization, and there are people who are not going to be a fit for your organization. In America, we are free to walk away from a job if we don't like it. And it sounds to me like those individuals chose to do that. I believe that President Trump and Elon Musk are upholding the Constitution of the United States, and I believe that they will continue to do that.
And just speaking of the elephant in the room here is Elon Musk. He was not elected and is very popular, and Trump is giving him wide latitude and fundamentally changed the government. That includes mass layoffs. So he's widely unpopular and giving him unfettered access to Americans' data and information. What do you say about that?
Well, I would say that the president has the authority to appoint anyone to do any job he chooses. I mean, you could look back at the last presidency and look to Anthony Fauci, who was not elected. He was appointed, and he pretty much single-handedly brought down our country with his policies around COVID-19. So the president, any president, has the authority to appoint people to positions. The president also has the responsibility to make sure that those individuals are doing the right things. I'm very confident that Elon Musk and President Trump understand what they're doing, and you know, that's kind of my opinion of that.
And before we let you go, lawmakers are often talking about bipartisanship, but blame the other side for not coming to the table. The result is a lot of inaction in Congress and at the state level. Is there any, or actually any, room for bipartisanship in Michigan right now? If so, what are those issues in Michigan that we can see both sides of the table coming to the table?
Well, I think fundamentally, when it comes down to it, every American citizen, whether you're Democrat, Independent, or Republican, wants to make a living. They want to be able to feed their families. They want to be able to take a vacation once in a while. And they want to be able to live their life in peace. So any issue that gets us to what the vast majority of Americans are concerned with, which is being able to have a reasonably nice life, will get us there.
Denise Elias is the executive director at Oakland County Republican Party. Denise, thank you so much for joining us on the Metro this morning.
And thank you.
Coming up, we'll continue discussing the Trump administration. Specifically, we'll try to understand the similarities and differences between Trump and former President Ronald Reagan. This is the Metro. Stay with us.
Love live radio, but juggling a full schedule? No worries. WDET's music shows are on your clock. Catch our shows anytime, anywhere for up to 3 weeks with WDET's Music on Demand. Discover music created in your own community or sounds from across the globe. Take WDET's music shows with you wherever you go at WDET.org/music or download the WDET mobile app.
Welcome back to the Metro on 101.9 WDET FM. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robin Vincent. We've been speaking with a leading Michigan conservative about what she makes of President Trump's politics. And one thing that's been considered recently is how similar Donald Trump's politics are to former President Ronald Reagan. Both worked in media before entering politics, and both wanted to shrink government. Reagan introduced $39 billion in budget cuts into law during his first year in office, reducing social welfare spending. He also signed onto a 25% tax cut.
And Robin, during his first term, Trump cut taxes. Now he's working with Elon Musk to reduce government spending and to shrink federal workforce. How similar, in fact, is Trump to Reagan? Are Trump's actions authoritarian or mere imitations of what we're seeing from past conservative administrations? To discuss this, we have Tom Raitt here. He is a lecturer in political economy at Queen Mary University of London. Tom, welcome to the Metro.
Thanks very much. Happy to be here.
So, how did Reagan change conservative politics in America? Where do we begin?
Well, I think what Reagan did was to combine a anti-government conservatism with a populist style that conservatives hadn't had too much of before. And I think that was a very potent combination. If you think about the sort of basic message of Reagan conservatism, the government's too big, bureaucrats in Washington are telling you what to do. That's all there in the Barry Goldwater campaign of 1964. But when Barry Goldwater proposed that, I think a lot of average voters, a lot of working class voters, people who depended on Social Security, they found that quite threatening. What Reagan's sort of genius was that he was able to combine that message with a style and a presentation which made it seem less threatening, particularly to a lot of working class, white working class voters who in the 1980s, for various reasons, were ready to walk out of the Democratic Party's coalition. And I think that's something that Reagan shares in many ways with Trump.
Could you talk a little bit about talking points used in mobilizing that white working class, especially during that time? What were some of the talking points, conversations that were happening? In what ways did it seem to be this rock star type of situation happening?
Well, I think there were a couple of things. So firstly, Reagan had a very sort of compelling narrative about why shrinking the size of government and cutting taxes would be beneficial for the average American. There was the framework of supply side economics, the idea of trickle down economics that, well, we make more space for the wealthy to invest and that eventually creates jobs for everyone. So there was a narrative there. I think the idea that government is inherently wasteful, that government is about bureaucrats spending other people's money and therefore people don't spend other people's money as careful as they spend their own. Those arguments have been advanced intellectually by people like Milton Friedman, and they created a perception of government as wasteful, which hadn't necessarily existed before. And there you have the idea then that, well, if there's just a lot of waste, which we kind of heard in your last segment, if there's a lot of waste, well, maybe they can cut a lot of that waste without it really affecting, the average hardworking American. And then I think finally, and this is again where maybe the sort of darker side of this rhetoric, which links to Trump, might come in. There's this idea of, well, what we're really going after are people who are cheating the system, the sort of undeserving people who are exploiting the system in various ways. And domestically, that played out for Reagan in the idea of the welfare queen, which is a real feature of his rhetoric in 1976. This is this idea of this woman. She has 80 names, 30 addresses, 12 Social Security cards, and she's on an income of over $150,000. Reagan used that rhetoric a great deal. And similarly, at the international level, there was the idea that, well, we're just going to get tough with our allies who aren't paying their way in their defense. So I think this idea that, well, we're targeting cheaters, and therefore, again, the average American, the hardworking American who might want to vote for this stuff and is struggling, there's this idea that we're not talking about you. We're not aiming at you. And I think those rhetorical devices allowed Reagan to get a lot of ordinary working class Americans on board to an anti-government agenda.
And, I just want to jump in really quickly, Tom, because for someone like myself, I wasn't around during the Reagan administration, that era of time in American politics. So, if you could expand on that a little bit and talk about how Trump has been influenced by Reagan, especially when you're talking about reaching a base or reaching a certain population of folks. The false image of the welfare queen instantly popped in my head because I may not be familiar with the Reagan era of politics, actually living through it, but I do know that the welfare queen has completely gone down to generations, and we all know what that means. So can you talk a little bit about Trump and his influence of Reagan?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think for a lot of conservatives, particularly conservatives who don't like Trump, the idea that Reagan and Trump are similar is very antithetical, because Reagan is associated with a kind of quite a heroic and principled conservatism. But I think there were many, many ways in which Trump was really shaped by that period in the 1970s and early 1980s. So as you noted, Reagan had worked in entertainment. He'd been an actor. Whereas Trump had been a reality TV star, and that led them to be kind of underestimated, perhaps, but I think really helped them hone their political instincts. Obviously, the slogan, "Make America Great Again," is something that goes back to 1980. I think you had in that period two things, really. You had a sense of anxiety about American decline. You had the problems of the energy crisis, deindustrialization, the competition with Japan and its sort of more statist form of capitalism, which kind of mirrors the way China has been competing with the US more recently. And I think there was a sense of pessimism, which Reagan very powerfully refuted and said, no, we're going to make America great again. And I think Trump probably recognized the power of that rhetoric and sort of being assertive and about American greatness. Interestingly, one sort of aspect of that, we saw recently the issue with Panama and Trump saying, well, we need to take the Panama Canal back. We should never have given it away. That's something directly that Reagan was saying in 1976, that we built it, we paid for it, we're going to keep it. So I think that kind of nationalism. The other thing, and maybe this is a little bit more controversial, but what critics of Reagan would say is that, as you're saying, that term, the welfare queen, for many people, that is a dog whistle. That is loaded with a politics of racial resentment. And another thing we might say about what was different from the 60s, when Barry Goldwater was rejected, to the 80s, when Reagan succeeded, was you had the politics of civil rights, the backlash against civil rights. There was maybe a sense that now government was associated with giving money to groups that maybe white working class people felt threatened by. And that maybe is something that Reagan kind of was alluding to. And that's something that you can sort of move forward to the way Trump talks about, well, the government, they're more interested in illegal immigrants than they are in you. So I think that those are some of the main parallels.
And, Tom, some people view Trump as a populist. What does that exactly mean? And are they wrong?
Yeah, well, populism is one of those words that people have very different definitions of, and it's quite hard to nail down. I would say it's one of those things, you know it when you see it. I think what it fundamentally is a style of communication where a politician is seen by their target viewers as authentic, as speaking in a language and a cultural set of references that people understand, that separates them from other politicians and goes, I'm not like other politicians, I'm like you. And I think both Reagan and Trump had that in a way that few politicians do. It's not necessarily a totally bad thing. I mean, I would argue that all successful politicians are to some extent populists, but I think Trump and Reagan are particularly good at using that to influence people's emotions.
You're listening to The Metro on 1019 WDET FM. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robin Vincent. We're speaking with Tom Raitt. He's a lecturer in political economy at Queen Mary University of London. We're discussing the similarities between former President Ronald Reagan and current President Donald Trump. What about when Trump says that he'll ensure that no one dies because they don't have health care, or when he pushed for Operation Warp Speed, which used government to develop vaccines during the COVID-19 pandemic? Are those counter examples to Trump's pro-free market policies?
Yeah, well, I think that does reflect that there are some key differences between Trump and Reagan. I would say Reagan had a stronger guiding philosophy. I mean, the sort of anti-government, libertarian, small state worldview, Reagan really definitely believed that very strongly. And I think it's sort of front-loaded with Reagan in a way it's not so much necessarily there with Trump as strongly, although that doesn't necessarily fit for the people around him, notably Elon Musk. I think for Trump, the emphasis is much more on the nationalism. And I think that's something of a change from Trump to Reagan, from Reagan to Trump.
The Trump administration has been shrinking the government, freezing funding, cutting government employees. In what ways are the policies similar between Reagan and Trump in this way?
Yeah, well, I think there is fundamentally a similar small state philosophy. There's a focus on supply side tax cuts. There's a focus on shrinking the states. So that's definitely a similarity. I think also some of the trade policy is surprisingly similar. I think people think of Reagan as a very consistent free market president, and Trump's sort of protectionism as more of a departure. But I think Reagan was actually quite a protectionist president by historical standards. And that's largely to do with competition from Japan and the effects that was having on US industry. Interestingly, again, Reagan's justification was distinctive for that because the protectionist measures that the Reagan administration pursued were very much based around punishing other countries for not obeying the rules. The idea was that these other countries, through their subsidies, through their kind of targeted industrial policies, were distorting free trade, and therefore protectionism was justified against them.
Tom, forgive me.
Sure.
Could I have you say more about a protectionist? We're not hearing that term a lot. What is a protectionist president?
So a protectionist is someone who believes in using tariffs and taxes on imports to try and encourage people to buy domestic products in a way to encourage industry and the local economy. And that's something that has historically been very against the kind of free market kind of philosophy of conservatism. But Trump is obviously a big believer in that.
Is it fair to say that Reagan and Trump are similar in terms of what they do, but different in terms of what they say? They cut government and spending, but Reagan and Trump have different styles. Reagan liked immigrants and generally tried to come off as kind. Trump, on the other hand, he's very much okay being an anti-hero. Is that fair to say that they're similar in terms of what they do, but not what they say?
I think that is fair. I would say both Reagan and Trump are populists in that they appeal strongly to emotions, but that Reagan was at his most effective when he was appealing to more positive emotions. People think of the Morning in America campaign, they think of the jokes, they think of the kind of good humor. That was his sort of natural zone. He could go on the attack, but he was sort of stronger in that sort of domain. Trump is probably at his most effective as a political operator when he's on the attack, when he's dividing, and therefore I think you could see them as having similar popular styles, but Trump maybe playing on a darker set of emotions. And there definitely is, both of them though, actually, a tendency to say extreme things, but to potentially be more pragmatic and to change their minds behind closed doors.
Is that tendency of authoritarian leaders to play upon people's fears? I mean, that sounds as old as time, but I'm wondering if that has ebbed and flowed.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think all successful politicians manipulate emotions to a certain extent, but I think usually that is constrained by a certain respect for democratic norms. And again, I think for the people who would want to insist Trump is quite different from Reagan, Reagan obviously was much more bound by his sort of constitutional role, almost as the sort of constitutional monarch of the United States, as a kind of a unifying figure. I think for various reasons, those norms have weakened, and maybe that leaves us a space which can potentially be more authoritarian.
Before we let you go, as briefly as you can, as a political scientist, are you concerned about authoritarianism in America under Trump?
Well, I think there's no doubt that Trump has more authoritarian tendencies than most, perhaps all, presidents the country has ever had. Fortunately, the founding fathers designed a lot of safeguards to prevent authoritarianism, and I guess we'll see how well they work.
Tom Raitt is a lecturer in political economy at Queen Mary University of London. Tom, thank you so much for joining us on the Metro.
Thanks for having me.
Coming up, we've been talking about the Trump administration from a few different angles. Next, we want to understand how fragile American democracy is right now and whether the Trump administration is pulling us closer to authoritarianism. Stay with us on the Metro. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Metro on 1019 WDET FM, Detroit Public Radio. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robin Vincent. During Trump's second campaign for president, many scholars, journalists, and normal folks became concerned. They feared, especially after the attempted insurrection on January 6, 2020, that democracy would become jeopardized. That remained true after listening to what Trump was saying during his second presidential campaign. The current president then promised to attack his political enemies with the military. Here's Trump at multiple stops in his 2024 presidential campaign.
I think the bigger problem is the enemy from within. We have some very bad people. We have some sick people, radical left lunatics. And I think they're and it should be very easily handled by, if necessary, by National Guard, or if really necessary, by the military. I am your warrior. I am your justice. And for those who have been wronged and betrayed, I am your retribution. I am your retribution.
At this point, Trump has been cutting government officials and freezing money. Is that enough to warrant fears of authoritarianism? If not, at what point should we be concerned about authoritarian rule?
To discuss this now, we have Lu-Kin Wei, Distinguished Professor of Democracy at the University of Toronto. Professor Wei, thank you so much for joining us on the Metro.
Oh, thank you so much.
Of course. So let's start here. What is authoritarianism?
So authoritarianism is basically any kind of system in which you do not have free and fair elections and in which it's costly to engage in any kind of opposition activity. It's a very broad term that encompasses anything from fascism to what we call competitive authoritarianism.
And explain that a little bit as well. Break that down for some of us who truly need to be broken down to like a 5-year-old.
Okay. Much smarter than that. Well, anyways, so basically competitive authoritarianism is a political system in which elections matter. They take place. They're competitive. Opposition exists, competes for power, but in which the leader engages in all sorts of abuse, anything from sort of auditing the taxes of opposition party members to investigating, party activists and the like, and basically kind of creating an uneven playing field against the opposition. Basically, competitive authoritarian regimes are sort of like a soccer match or a baseball game in which the umpire or referees are on the side of one team and trying to sabotage the other.
We see that too often in sports, way too often in sports. So you referenced Freedom House, which has downgraded America's Global Freedom Index. So if we could just, for a brief moment, just explain to folks the Americans Global Freedom Index, what that means, just a little bit.
So the Freedom House just measures on a scale of 0 to 100 how free a country is. The higher the score, the more free. And right now, even before Trump came to power, the United States was basically at the level of Romania and Panama. So, and before Trump, we were at sort of at the level of France. We were tied with France. So we've already, even before Trump come to power, we've already seen a sort of a dramatic decline in democracy in the United States.
And okay, so before Trump, we're starting to see a backslide here. What does that mean? What are the things like in Romania that you would compare that to us, or what's the data telling us about the comparison there?
Well, these are countries in which, when you engage in opposition activity, right, you have to worry about, am I going to get audited, more than if I didn't, give to opposition. If you're a business person, right, you have to think, well, if I support a democratic cause, if I sort of, have people on my board who donated to the Democratic Party, will I get those business opportunities, or will they be given to someone else? This is the kind of thing that I think people need to understand really affects our daily lives in a profound way.
And how did America start to slide on its freedom index? What was going on before Trump took office to make this happen? I was just getting out of college at that time. So what was going on around 2014?
I think for a long time, historically, the United States was not very polarized. Both parties were very similar to one another. And so the stakes in each election were not very high. However, in part due to sort of the Nixon strategy in 1968, parties became increasingly polarized, often around civil rights. And so what you've seen basically since the 1990s is the emergence of, I don't know another way of saying it, but an authoritarian Republican Party that seeks to undermine democracy. This was first reflected in the 2000s when there was efforts to kind of restrict the vote because the Republicans felt they could not win if everyone showed up. But we've seen it really kind of accelerate under Trump, who has a lot of dictatorial inclinations, and the most important thing, has the Republican Party lockstep behind him.
So many good questions. How does, as we continue on, but how does Trump fit into this narrative of shifting America towards authoritarianism type of society?
Well, he basically, he has decided that the only election he's willing to accept are ones that he's won. So he treats, his sort of major, how should I say, innovation in 2020. He's the first president in any part of United States history, 250 years, to openly challenge the results. That is, you can't get more authoritarian than what happened on January 6th, 2021. And the Republican Party at that point could have decided to reject him, not to nominate him again, to vote for his impeachment. But in contrast to 1974, when the same Republican Party chose to sort of oppose Nixon during his abuses of power, the Republican Party in 2021 decided to go the authoritarian route. And I think that is, essentially what's happened, and that's what's caused the crisis we are now in.
And I know a lot of us will never forget where we were January 6, 2021. You're listening to The Metro on WDET, Detroit Public Radio. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robin Vincent. We're speaking with Luke Nwei. He's a distinguished professor of democracy at the University of Toronto about Donald Trump and the state of American democracy. And Professor Nwei, we have a few more questions for you about so-called competitive authoritarianism. But I did want to ask you from your perch in Canada, in Toronto, how concerned you would say Canadians are right now about what's happening in the U.S. Are you seeing a high level of concern, especially, I mean, when we're talking about tariffs or democracy overall?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to exaggerate just how concerned we are. I mean, I think we've suddenly woken up to a world in which the country with the largest military in the world is suddenly our enemy. 37% of Canadians now think of the United States as an enemy, which is completely unimaginable just about a month ago. And so I think there is, all these quote unquote jokes about the 51st state. These are kind of represent existential threats. And what you've seen is a dramatic rise in Canadian patriotism that I've simply never seen. Historically, Canadians they didn't really care about patriotism. They were never kind of very nationalistic. My God, there's just been such a transformation that I've seen myself in the last couple of weeks, directly tied to sort of Trump's threats.
Yeah, I've been seeing a lot of images on social media about buying Canadian, and I was wondering how common or how much there's been a proliferation of ads like that, for example.
Walk down the street, you see handmade signs, by businesses that say, we don't sell American fish, we don't sell American products. I mean, this is incredible. The kind of grassroots, it's all completely organic from above, handwritten signs. I mean, this is something that sort of has shocked everyone, I think, here. Of course, it's not, Canadians are usually just very polite and mild mannered and constantly saying sorry when they shouldn't say sorry and the like. So this is, completely transformed this country.
Wow. And I mean, I know this is more a matter of degrees, but what would signal to you that America is now a competitive, authoritarian country instead of a democratic one?
I think it already is a competitive authoritarian country right now. I mean, we've seen the sort of initial signs of it. It's still pretty soft. So where do you see it? So I mentioned about the referees. The competitive authoritarian countries are countries in which it's like a soccer game where the referee backs one side and tries to sabotage the other. We already see this with the media, with Trump's systematic attacks through frivolous lawsuits against various major media operations. PBS, of course, NPR. Attacking the core source of NPR financing, and the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, which is supposed to be a non-biased referee, has revived cases against sort of pro-democratic media sources like CBS or kind of more independent media sources like CBS and ABC, but declined to revive similar cases of bias against Fox News. So we've already seen the sort of biased referee right now, and we don't have to wait. And it's only going to get worse because the much more troubling signs, I think, come from the FBI with the purge of the FBI and Kash Patel, who's been a political loyalist of Trump, and when the FBI becomes basically a political police whose purpose is to target political opposition. That is, we've really entered a new paradigm.
Professor Nwei, I want to mention a recent development that seems to be in response to some of the things that you're describing. Recently, over 20 civil service employees resigned from the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE. They wrote in a resignation letter that DOGE isn't properly serving the American people, and they were unwilling to dismantle critical services to Americans. Is that a good sign that people are resigning? Is this an effective way people are defending democracy by not working for the Trump administration?
Absolutely. No, I think that basically people asking what can be done, all of the above. In other words, we need to, people who need to contact their representatives, demand that they do something about this. If you're a federal employee and you're fired illegally, do not leave the office. Force them to come to you and drag you out. That's what you need to do. If you're in the Doge or whatever, definitely resigning is the appropriate course of action. In other words, what we need to do is draw attention to what is going on, because the problem is what's happened until recently is what Timothy Snyder, who's at my university, calls obeying in advance. So when Christopher Wray, the former head of the FBI, resigned because he knew that sort of Trump would fire him, that was, I think, a huge mistake. You need to force Musk and Trump to really, to try and you have to resist efforts to create an authoritarian regime. So I think, and I think that's going to increase. I think people have kind of woken up, and I think it's in that sense, that's a source of optimism.
So, Professor Wei, Republicans that we've spoken with would say that this is conservatism, and it sounds to me like you're saying this is not a partisan issue at all. Is that accurate?
This is not conservatism. This is not about cutting taxes or policy. This is about authoritarianism. This is about what we had the American Revolution about, which was overthrowing kings. I mean, God, sorry, it's really
Well, and that means that if authoritarianism is to be shaken off, that it likely will be on the backs of Democrats to do that, though. And so what is your advice? What do you think that Democrats need to do right now, and how are they doing? What are you observing as far as their response to Trump? What's your grade for them?
So I would say about a C or a D. I think there is sort of two kind of schools of thought. Sort of the Jim Carville, who everybody knows was the major strategist back in the 90s for Bill Clinton, and Hakeem Jeffries, the minority leader in the House. They've sort of argued for a passive strategy. Their logic is, well, if you see the other side failing, get out of their way. And it's true at some level that what Trump is doing is going to be a disaster for the country. There's going to increase inflation and all that the stuff that's likely to make Trump less popular. So there is a certain logic to it, but I think they underestimate the stakes of what's going on. This is not like any other presidency. I think you're seeing the wholesale destruction of the constitutional system, and therefore we need to sort of prevent that from happening. So we can't simply sit back and wait for them to fail. We have to take a more proactive stance.
Lucan Wei is a distinguished professor of democracy at the University of Toronto. Professor Wei, thank you so much for joining us on the Metro.
It was a pleasure.
And we cover a lot of topics on this show: culture, government, climate, technology, health, you name it. What stories matter most to you? Let us know by leaving a voicemail. Open the WDET mobile app and hit the open mic button and tell us your name and what you want to hear from the Metro.
This is WDET-FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation.